So fix my ship, human. Alien Empress snaps after 28 failure. But a Martian dad does it asterisk. The Martian wind scoured the outpost like a curse, hurling red dust across the horizon in swirling sheets that whispered through metal joints and tugged at worn seals. Jack Thorne squinted into the glare of the twin suns as he knelt beside the rust-caked housing of Olympus Outpost's oldest water reclaimer. His hands, wrapped in patched gloves, moved with practiced confidence, tightening the final bolt of a makeshift seal that had no right working, except that Jack had made it work. The reclaimer shuddered once, coughed a plume of dusty vapor, then hummed into something resembling life. Jack wiped his brow with the back of his arm and checked his wrist chronometer. 1,500 hours. Just enough time to finish the remaining units and still make it to Evie's science presentation. She'd been working on her Martian microbiota display for weeks. Jack hadn't missed one of her school nights, yet not since her mom died 3 years ago. He wasn't about to start now. The cum clipped to his collar crackled. Jack, it's Garrison. You copy? Jack sighed. He could already hear the strain in the supervisor's voice. Go ahead. We've got a situation down at Docking Bay 7. Emergency priority. You're the closest qualified mechanic, not on shift. Get your ass over there. I've still got 3 reclaimers to service, and my daughter's got her presentation tonight. I'm already behind. Listen, Jack. This isn't some mining. Tug, this ship is ... different. Fancy. Not from around here. Define fancy. Fusion. That word alone was enough to make Jack sit back on his heels. Fusions didn't just show up on backwater dust heaps like Olympus. They hovered above you in orbit and sent diplomats when they wanted something. They didn't dock at rusty outposts surrounded by broken haulers and half-functional life support. Grids. And Jack asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. They say the propulsion system won't initiate. They've already gone through 2 teams of techs. They're not happy. Not happy how? Royal not happy. Jack muttered a curse and looked back at the water reclaimer. It hissed and groaned like it might explode in slow motion, but it was holding. For now, double pay, Garrison said, as if reading his hesitation. Jack remained silent. Triple, if you fix it before 1,800 hours. Jack's jaw clenched. Triple pay could cover new Atma boots for Evie. It could buy Sophie's medication without juggling overdue bills. He looked at the red horizon, toward the school dome where Evie would soon be rehearsing her speech. 1-8-0-0. He said firmly, whether the ship's running or not, I'm out. Understood. You won't regret it. Jack doubted that. He never regretted fixing things, but he did regret missing moments. Time had a funny way of slipping through your fingers on Mars. He slung his tool pack over his shoulder and started toward the docking bays, the heat pressing down on his shoulders like a physical weight. Docking Bay 7 had never looked so clean. The loading platform had been swept clear of debris. Several Terran engineers stood awkwardly near their tool carts, pointedly avoiding the attention of the tall, green-skinned figure at the center of the bay. Even from a distance, Jack could tell she wasn't just a visitor, she was royalty. Her emerald skin shimmered faintly in the filtered sunlight, and her black robes clung to her tall frame like liquid shadow. Standing beside her was a smaller Fusion figure, young, female, with the wide, observant eyes of someone who saw far more than she let on. And behind them, floating like a dream forged from alien mathematics, was the ship. It was ... wrong. Wrong in the way that made human engineering look crude. The curves of its hull reflected the Martian light like polished silver dipped in starlight. No seams, no rivets, no visible engines. Just a single access panel open like a petal, unfurled in discontent. 28 engineers, the Empress was saying. Her voice was calm, melodious but edged with disdain. across 3 systems. None could fix it. I am beginning to wonder whether the Sol system breeds incompetence as a resource. One of the engineers, a sweating man in a corporate uniform, cleared his throat. Your luminescence, we've done all we can. It's not a matter of effort, but your systems integrate organic tech that I am aware of my ship's nature. She snapped, the temperature in the bay seeming to drop. What I require is not explanation, but results. Her golden gaze shifted as Jack stepped into view, still dust-covered, still in oil-stained coveralls. She looked at him like someone might study a crack in fine porcelain. Then she laughed cool and crystalline. This is your next offering? She asked no one in particular. A Martian dust rat with a wrench? Jack could have walked away. Then the child beside her turned. Her eyes met his dot, and unlike her parents' contempt, hers held something else, curiosity, hope, something worth staying for. Asterisk, the silence that followed the Empress's dismissal was thick enough to choke on. Engineers shifted uncomfortably, and even the air recyclers seemed to hesitate. Jack didn't flinch. He'd been insulted by corporate execs, chewed out by smugglers, and even punched once by a drunken mining foreman. Royal disdain was just another flavor of the same arrogance. But that look in the girl's eyes, that flicker of belief, anchored him more than pride ever could. Dominic Walsh stepped forward, clearly rattled. His once pristine uniform bore fresh creases, his hair tousled like he'd been running fingers through it in frustration. Your luminescence, Dominic said, voice strained. This is Jack Thorne. He's unconventional, but he's the best systems man on Mars. If anyone can figure out what's wrong with your ship. If 28 specialists have failed, the Empress cut in, what miracle can one mechanic deliver? Does he wield magic? In his filthy toolkit? Jack crossed the platform without asking permission, stopping just short of the ship's open panel. I don't do miracles, he said simply, but I listen better than most. The Empress raised a sculpted brow. You believe that's what my cruiser needs? A sympathetic ear? Jack didn't answer her. He addressed Dominic instead. What of... You tried? Dominic looked relieved to be talking shop again. Diagnostics. Reboots. Resyncing the power matrices. No hardware faults, but the core refuses to engage the propulsion systems. Almost like it's sulking. Jack snorted softly. Machines don't sulk, but they do protect themselves. He crouched beside the access panel. The internal workings looked like a living sculpture, veins of crystalline wiring, panels that pulsed with slow light like a sleeping heartbeat. Terran tech was hard lines and brittle boards. This was something different. Something alive. You have 1 hour, the Empress said coldly. Then I requisition a diplomatic vessel and file formal complaints with your colonial authority. Jack nodded absently, already opening his bag. Won't take that long, hopefully. As he worked, he felt eyes on him. Not the Empress. She turned away with an elegant flick of her cape, but the child remained. She stepped forward cautiously, her gaze fixed not on the tools but on his hands, not judging. Studying. You're not afraid of the ship, she said softly, voice melodic yet youthful. Jack glanced up. Should I be? Most humans are. They treat our ships like beasts, dangerous and unknowable. Jack offered a faint smile. Machines are only dangerous when you force them to be something they're not. I've seen plenty of equipment fry itself because some hotshot engineer tried to override its protocols instead of understanding them. She tilted her head. You speak like you know what it's thinking. I don't have to know exactly. I've got kids. They don't always tell me what's wrong. But if you pay attention, if you respect the signals, you figure it out. The girl's eyes brightened at that. You have offspring? 2 girls. Evie's 12. Sophie's 8. Smart, stubborn, and suspicious of bedtime. The girl, Smiled a small, real smile. My designation is Naira. My father is the Empress. Jack blinked. Father? Naira's smile didn't waver. Fusion family roles don't align with Terran gender categories. My progenitor prefers the paternal role, regardless of form. It confuses humans. Doesn't bother me, Jack said, returning to the panel. Function's more important than label. He pulled out his diagnostic tablet. Outdated by 20 years, but he'd modified it beyond recognition. Instead of querying systems directly, it mapped energy signatures, how a machine felt, in a sense. Patterns emerged, showing him what the ship's native systems were reacting to Dot as expected. No faults. But there was interference, an external radiation spike that tripped every safety protocol like a herd of angry sirens. Phobos. Jack muttered. Naira leaned closer. What about it? Phobos is emitting a radiation signature similar to the Crimson Nebula, Naira finished, eyes widening. My father's flagship was nearly destroyed there. The safety protocols must have been hard-coded after. Jack nodded. Your ship's not broken. It's just scared. The phrase hung in the air between them, strange and oddly appropriate. Machines didn't feel, but some were built by species that did. That emotion bled into the tech, shaped its responses. Jack reached for a fiber relay and began rerouting the signal path. I'll build a filter. Something to convince the system this environment is safe. It won't be elegant, but it'll work. Naira watched him intently. Why help us? Jack paused. Because your father's chewing out good people who didn't do anything wrong. Because you looked at me like I might help. And because triple pay covers my daughter's medication and her new school boots. A silence followed that confession, but it wasn't awkward. You're different from other Terrans, Naira said finally. Jack didn't answer. He just kept working. 20 minutes later, the panels around them pulsed, first flickering, then steadying into a slow, harmonious rhythm. The ship was waking up, and outside the control room, the Empress was already turning back, golden eyes narrowing at the impossible sight. Jack Thorne, dusty mechanic, had done what 28 engineers could not. The cruiser came to life, like a creature stirring from deep slumber. Lights that had been dim or dead began to glow, first faintly, then with growing intensity. Panels that had refused to respond hummed with soft tones, and the ambient temperature shifted warmer, more stable. A deep harmonic resonance passed through the ship, as though it were relieved. Jack stood up slowly, his fingers still hovering near the control panel, ready to abort the buffer sequence if things went sideways. But nothing went sideways. Everything fell into place. Behind him. Naira's voice broke the silence. You calmed it? Jack nodded, still watching the diagnostics scroll across his tablet. It recognized the filter. Thought the threat was real, but now it knows better. It's like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you're home. The door to the chamber hissed open. The Empress entered, her stride as fluid and commanding as ever. But this time, there was no derision in her gaze. Just intense, unreadable scrutiny. The ship is responsive, she said, each word laced with both disbelief and analysis. Fully initialized. All systems reporting nominal. How? Jack turned to face her, tucking the tablet under his arm. It wasn't a mechanical failure. Your ship's core interpreted radiation from Phobos as hostile, similar to whatever happened near the Crimson Nebula. The safety protocols locked it down. I didn't fix it. Recontextualized it. The Empress narrowed her golden eyes. And 28 engineers could not arrive at this conclusion? Jack shrugged. They were looking for something broken. Your ship isn't broken. It's cautious. Naira beamed at her parent. It's just like you said. Father-son machines think like organisms. You designed the cruiser to learn from experience, to remember trauma. The Empress's gaze shifted. Between the two of them, a subtle softening around her mouth, the only sign of acknowledgement. Indeed. She stepped further into the control room, now bathed in a cool bioluminescent glow. Her gaze fell to Jack's diagnostic tablet. "That device," she said, voice tinged with something close to amusement. "It is ... antiquated. Commercial grade, obsolete by our standards." Jack offered a faint smile. "Maybe, but I've tuned it over the years to listen, not command. Most engineers tell machines what to do. I ask what they need." The Empress tilted her head. "And you believe machines have needs?" "I believe systems, especially ones that blend organic tech and energy resonance, react to stress. Doesn't matter if it's a water reclaimer or a royal cruiser. You don't fix it by barking orders. You fix it by listening to what it's trying to protect." She considered that for a long moment. "Your compensation," she said at last, "will be above Terran scale. Name your price." Jack shook his head. "I didn't do this for a payout. Just the standard rate Garrison mentioned will do fine. I have a commitment this evening." The Empress arched an eyebrow. "A more pressing engagement than consulting with a royal vessel?" Jack didn't flinch. "My daughter's presentation. Science fair. She's 12. Worked hard for it." The room was still. Then Naira turned toward her parent. "He should go. Family obligations are sacred, aren't they?" The Empress's expression changed just slightly, but enough. "They are." She stepped forward, standing toe-to-toe with Jack. "You understand systems others cannot. You recognized my vessel's silence as self-preservation. That is not common insight." Jack shifted uneasily under her gaze. She extended a hand. "Not for a handshake, but as a gesture of formal offer. I will have my attach send a consultancy. Agreement to your communit. Should you accept, you will advise on integration projects between fusion technology and Terran environments. The terms will include technological access, generous pay, and flexible scheduling." Jack hesitated. He thought of Evie's wide eyes as she practiced her speech, of Sophie's small hands clutching his sleeve when storms rattled the dome. "At night, flexible?" he repeated. "Negotiated with your offspring's needs in mind," the Empress said, with a glance at Naira. "We fusions understand the weight of guardianship." Jack nodded slowly. "Then I'll read the contract." After the science fair, the Empress gave a faint smile. Not warm, but not cold either. Measured, respectful. "Very well, Mr. Thorne. You are dismissed for now." As Jack turned to leave, Naira stepped close and handed him a small crystal disc. "A communication token," she explained. "It's paired to my personal channel, in case you want to compare notes on microbiota or ships." Jack took it gently. "Thanks, kid." As the door hissed open behind him, and he stepped back onto the red-soiled bay, the Empress turned to watch her cruiser fully awaken for the first time since it arrived. "He's different," Naira said softly. "Yes," the Empress replied. "And in a galaxy full of conquerors and sycophants, different may be exactly what we need." The Martian wind howled as Jack Thorne stepped back onto the landing platform, the red dust curling around his boots like smoke. Behind him, the fusion cruiser glowed faintly, a beacon of impossible technology, now humming with life. Engineers and dockhands who had once stared at it in helpless awe now turned to stare at Jack instead. He adjusted the strap of his tool bag and made for the exit. Dominic intercepted him halfway to the lift, eyes wide, mouth already halfway through a question. "You did it?" he asked, voice hushed, like saying it too loud might shatter the illusion. "The ship, it's fixed?" Jack just nodded. "Recalibrated a misfire in the core's threat recognition sequence. Radiation from Phobos was triggering failsafes. Built a buffer and let the system relax." Dominic blinked. "You ... Let the system relax?" "Pretty much." Dominic looked back at the cruiser like it might sprout wings and fly away. Jack ... She's going to remember this. I'm counting on her forgetting, Jack muttered. But of course, that hope was short-lived. As he turned the corner toward the main corridor, a wave of camera flashes met him, holographic recorders, outpost news drones, and a crowd of curious staffers. At the center stood Garrison, Olympus Outpost's weary supervisor, suddenly looking like a man reborn. Next to him was a tall, balding man in a pressed colonial administrator's uniform. Administrator Hoffman. He stepped forward, extending a too eager hand. Mr. Thorne, Administrator Caleb Hoffman, Colonial Affairs. I must say what you've accomplished today. Jack didn't take the hand. I need to be somewhere. Important. Of course, Hoffman said, backing off unfazed. I understand. We just wanted to thank you on behalf of the Sol Colonial Authority for resolving what could have been an interstellar incident. It was a ship that wouldn't start, Jack said flatly. Not a war. Still, the optics, Hoffman, began, but stopped abruptly as the cruiser's boarding ramp hissed open. The Empress descended like a specter of elegance and power, black robes flowing behind her. Naira trailed just behind. The entire crowd went still. Jack turned, ready to excuse himself, but her voice cut clean across the bay. This human, the Empress said, gesturing toward him with one graceful hand, has resolved the malfunction that crippled our vessel. With tools considered primitive and a mind considered unremarkable, he succeeded where my engineers did not. Asterisk a pause. Then, it appears that capability is not solely the domain of titles and schooling. The crowd rippled with whispers. Jack stood still, face unreadable, until Hoffman stepped forward with a wary smile. Your luminescence, he said. The Colonial Authority welcomes your praise. We hope this moment may strengthen ties between our peoples. I am not here for politics, the Empress said coolly. I am here because my cruiser failed and this Terran repaired it. Should I require his services again, I will summon him. But Hoffman began, before her gaze pinned him. Unless you wish the Fusion delegation to raise concerns about Sol's engineer training programs at the Centurion Summit tomorrow. Hoffman turned a shade paler. Of course not, your luminescence. Jack cleared his throat. If this is all settled, I have to go. My daughter has a presentation, the Empress said, and to everyone's astonishment, nodded. Go. We will not delay your schedule. Her tone made it sound like she was granting him leave from battle. Naira stepped forward quickly, pressing a glowing crystal device into his hand. This is your copy of the consulting agreement, and a secure line to the Fusion Imperium. I hope we speak again. Jack met her eyes. I'm sure we will. He turned and walked away, leaving the crowd, the cameras, the politicians, and the royal ship behind. The world felt quieter outside the bay, dustier, more honest. He quickened his pace. If he moved fast, he'd make it on time. Asterisk. By the time Jack reached the school dome, parents were filing in. Children in makeshift uniforms ran between display tables, excited chatter bouncing off the curved walls. He found Evie standing near a trifold presentation board titled Martian. Microbiota, Adaptation Under Stress. She was twisting the hem of her shirt, scanning the entrance with nervous energy. When her eyes landed on him, they lit up. You made it, she cried, throwing her arms around him. You said you would, but I thought maybe ... I promised, Jack said, holding her tight. I keep promises. Sophie waved from across the room, seated with their neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, who gave Jack a knowing smile. Did the ship break? Evie asked. Only a little, Jack said, straightening her collar. Turns out it just needed someone to listen. Evie tilted her head in the same thoughtful way Naira had. That's what I said about the microbes. They act out when the soil's off balance. Jack chuckled. Guess we're both engineers, huh? She grinned. Guess so. Later, as she presented her findings to a small panel of teachers and colonial scientists, Jack sat in the back, watching her beam with pride, gesturing excitedly to charts and samples. When they announced her as first prize winner in her age category, the entire auditorium erupted in cheers, none louder than Sophie's. Jack didn't hear his cum-buzz until they were outside again, walking home under the Martian night sky. A message blinked on his screen. Consultant Thorne, first installment transferred. Your service is expected within 14 solar days. The Empress sends regards to your offspring and anticipates a successful microbiota presentation. Fusion Stellar IMPERIUM. Stared at it for a long time. Everything okay? Evie asked. He looked down at both daughters, walking beside him, bathed in pale red moonlight. Yeah, he said softly. Better than okay. He slipped the cum back into his pocket and slung an arm over each of their shoulders. Come on, he said. I've got a hell of a story to tell you about a spaceship, a green alien girl, and a job offer that could change our lives. Asterisk, the next morning, Olympus Outpost was buzzing with a kind of quiet chaos Jack hadn't seen in years. People nodded at him differently now. Maintenance techs gave him wide-eyed looks. Vendors offered him free coffee. Even the dome security officers greeted him by name, with respect in their tone instead of suspicion. It was all surreal. He was still the same man with the same warm boots and the same patched toolkit. But now he was the guy who fixed the Fusion Empress's cruiser. The guy who succeeded where 28 other engineers failed. The news feeds had already given him a dozen nicknames. The Martian Miracle Mechanic, the Alien Whisperer, Dust Dad. One station even aired a segment titled Jack Thorne, Just a Dad, or Humanity's New Diplomatic Ace. Jack nearly choked on his recycled water when he saw that one. He tried to keep his head down. The attention wasn't why he'd done it. It never was. But fame, apparently, didn't care what you wanted. By midday, the offer started rolling in. Job at Solnet Aerospace, 6 figures, and a relocation to Luna City. A research fellowship at Mars Colonial University, teaching alien systems engineering. Even a request from the corporate delegation on Earth, asking him to join. A Terran Fusion. Integration think tank. Whatever that was, he turned them all down, because the real offer, the one that mattered, had already been made. 4 days after the Empress departed, Jack stood in the center of their new home in the green zone. The air filtration worked without a rattle. The floors weren't cracked. There were actual windows, and the girls had separate rooms for the first time in their lives. He could finally breathe. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, showing her stuffed Volix plush to her new cum unit, a shimmering fusion disk. As paper, gifted by Naira. Look, he can change colors too, she told the device, holding up the plush that now glowed faintly pink. On the other end, Naira's curious voice chirped through. Does he respond to stimuli, or is that a manual override? Fascinating. Jack chuckled from the kitchenette. Careful, he called. She have you testing that thing for days. She's smart, Sophie replied matter-of-factly. I like her. Evie appeared from her room, holding up a tiny backpack. Dad, do you think we'll actually get to go to the Fusion Symposium next cycle? Jack leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. If it's still part of the agreement, and if it's safe, yeah. I don't see why not. Evie looked thoughtful. What if we like it there? Jack's breath caught. He set down the mug in his hands. That's a conversation we'd have together, he said gently. Evie nodded, satisfied. Okay. That evening, his cum buzzed again. It was Garrison this time. You're not gonna believe this, he said, voice half shocked, half proud. The Empress made a statement at the Centurion Summit. Said your holistic approach to technology reflects values the Imperium wants to encourage across human settlements. Colonial authorities spinning it as a massive win. You're famous, Jack, not just locally, system-wide. Jack groaned, running a hand through his hair. I didn't ask for any of that. I know, Garrison chuckled. But maybe you earned it anyway. The next few days moved in a blur of preparation. The Vusion attached sent over full access codes and transport logistics. His first formal consulting session was scheduled at the Vusion outpost orbiting Proxima Centauri. The trip would take 3 days, with 1 day on site before his return. He packed lightly. His tablet, his patched toolkit, a fresh shirt, and 2 holoprints of his daughters. Evie walked him to the landing tram, while Sophie clutched his leg like a barnacle. 3 days, Jack repeated, and I'm back. What if the ship breaks again? Sophie asked, eyes wide. The Empress has 28 other engineers, he said, kneeling down. But only 1 dad. Evie smirked. You're gonna bring back alien food, right? No excuses. Jack laughed and kissed the top of her head. Only if it doesn't crawl off my plate. The tram doors opened with a soft hiss. He turned once. More to look at them as girls, his reason for everything. He waved, and they waved back, smaller and smaller, as the tram began its journey to the orbital shuttle platform. Hours later, the stars stretched across the viewport like a frozen river of fire. Jack sat alone in a quiet passenger pod, his thumb brushing over the silver Vusion cum disc Nera had given him. A message blinked onto the screen. Consultation parameters approved. Your presence has already shifted internal protocol dynamics. The Empress is ... intrigued. Imperial Attache Velen. Jack sighed, leaned back in his seat, and stared out into the cosmos. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a bridge between cultures, between systems, between how things are and how they could be. But above all, he was still a father. Was the system he understood best, and no alien technology, no viral stardom, and no interstellar consultancy would ever change that. 3 days? Then he'd be home. And maybe, just maybe, ready for whatever came next. 3 days later, almost to the minute. The transport shuttle broke through the thin Martian atmosphere and descended toward Olympus Outpost, now glittering like a rust-red jewel beneath the stars. Jack Thorne sat by the window, his toolkit resting under his seat and his patched jacket slung over one shoulder. Outside, the colony looked the same cracked soil, wind-worn domes, and the ever-present shimmer of static shielding, but everything felt different now. His cum chimed with a local signal before they even landed. Incoming message, encrypted. Source, home subject. We missed you attached. 17 photos. 3 audio clips. 1 urgent question from Sophie. Can I have a pet Volix? Jack smiled, already picturing Sophie's determined little face, clutching her stuffed lizard toy like it was alive. His fingers hovered over the response button, but the shuttle had already begun final descent. He'd be able to answer in person soon enough. The docking clamps latched with a jolt, and within minutes, Jack was stepping down the ramp into Martian soil once more. The wind hit him first dry, metallic, familiar, and then came the high-pitched squeal of a voice he'd missed more than he'd realized. Da! Sophie barreled into him, wrapping her arms around his waist with the force of a small meteor. He staggered, but caught her easily, lifting her in one arm as Evie approached at a more measured pace. You're exactly on time, Evie said with narrowed eyes. I told Sophie you would be. Jack grinned, shifting Sophie to his hip. And you were right. I promised. Mrs. Abernathy waited in the background, giving him a small salute before walking back toward the transport hub. Jack made a mental note to bring her something from the Vusion vendor stalls next time. They walked home together under the rising Martian dusk. The green zone glowed with warm light, children's laughter, and the software of air processors actually working for once. Windows flickered with life. It wasn't Earth, and it never would be, but it finally felt like home. At dinner, Jack told them stories. Not about the Empress, at least not much. Not about political maneuvering or the gaunt, silent advisors who stood at her side like shadows. But about the ship and the strange organic conduits that pulsed like arteries. About the way Nira had tried to introduce him to a fusion game involving anti-gravity bubbles and glowing insect husks. About the food, especially the food. It wiggled, Jack said, poking his plate for emphasis. That means it's fresh. Sophie giggled. And she let you come back? Evie asked, chewing thoughtfully. Jack nodded. The Empress understands something important. Family comes first. She said so herself. Does that mean we're going to meet them? Evie asked quietly. Like ... in person? Jack set his utensils down. I was actually going to talk to you about that. Both girls sat up straighter. He pulled a crystal chip from his pocket sleeve. Iridescent, unmistakably fusion. This is an invitation to the Stellar Symposium on Cultural Exchange, held on Varanthos Prime. It's technically school, but with aliens and real-time translation. And yes, he added, glancing at Sophie, live Volexes. Sophie gasped. Evie stared. You're serious? As serious as a radiation leak. Silence stretched for a moment, thick with implication. Then Evie spoke, voice soft. Would we leave Mars? Maybe. Maybe just for a few months. Maybe longer later, if it works for us. We don't have to decide now. But they want to meet the two girls who convinced a Martian mechanic to take on a royal cruiser. Sophie squealed and hugged him again. But Evie was quiet. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. Hey, we don't do anything unless we choose it. Together, Evie looked up. Is it safe? Safer than a mining job in the outer belt, Jack said. And they respect us. You. Nira already sent a message asking if you'd share your research on microbial adaptation with one of their young biologists. Me? Evie blinked. Why me? Because you're smart. Because your project won first prize. And because you're already doing what they hope the galaxy learns to do, look closely at small things ... and care.